Hey, what's going on? This is Matt Lownes here at LTV. I'm very glad to get the All In Affordable Housing Show back going here. And today I'm joined with Clifford Cawthon of the Sightline Institute, all the way out in the Pacific Northwest.
Hey
Um,
Matt,
how you doing?
I'm good. Feel free to just call me Cliff, but I appreciate the
Awesome.
intro.
Yeah, awesome. Not done yet.
Hmm.
Cliff's originally from New York State. He's currently the Pro Housing Coalition Strategy Manager for the Sightline Institute, which we will dive into shortly. He has taught political science at Bellevue College, emphasizing in civic engagement and activism to his students. And finally, and arguably most impressively, received a Master's of Arts degree in Human Rights and Political Science from the University of Manchester, all the way in the United Kingdom. So you
Thank
have
you.
quite literally been just about everywhere except for the Midwest, give or take.
No, I've been many places in the Midwest, particularly in northern Midwest. But yeah, man, that was one hell of an intro. Kudos.
I try my best with all my guests.
Ooh, nice
Let's
rhyme. I like that. That was good. That was good.
let's start with obviously let's start with your job right now as the Pro Housing Coalition Strategy Manager for Sightline Institute. Tell me a little bit, or really our viewers, what the Sightline Institute is and what you do specifically.
So the Sightline Institute is a think tank that's committed to um, essentially committed to identifying ways to make Cascadia, which is a bioregion. So when we think of regions, we tend to think of them in political geographic terms, or by the political geography, right? The borders that we make, or kind of a broader geographical definition versus bioregion, which is the interconnected ecosystem that connects different parts of a region. So Cascadia comprises Washington, what was it? Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, Idaho, Montana, and of course Alaska, parts of Alaska. So yeah, basically we're committed to making Cascadia a more sustainable and generally equitable place. And basically my job is more on the external side, where I work with our partners and work with our housing team in order to advance pro housing legislation and really build a robust and diverse coalition in order to sorry, my apologies, don't worry, it's not Rona. But to be able to advocate for more housing and more housing choices for all of our neighbors.
So I guess my follow-up question would be, where does the Sightline Institute fall as far as locally, statewide, and nationally? Are there causes being fought for all three, or is it more on the local aspect of things?
Excellent question. So the Sightline Institute right now is focused on a number of state level policies. So when it comes to Cascadia, as I mentioned, like the bioregion cuts across a number of states. So one might think, okay, so does that mean federal advocacy? And while there are certain positions we have from based on our research on federal policies, particularly around housing, energy, and waste, toxic waste, and transportation, that most of our advocacy focuses on state level work. So I have counterparts in Alaska, in Idaho, in Oregon, and actually some of our really great work is being done in Oregon, and then second to that, well, is Washington, depending on the day, because my colleagues in Alaska are doing amazing work. In fact, so when I said Sightline works on making Cascadia more sustainable and generally just and equitable place, one thing that you might not realize that means is that we also work on democracy reforms. So essentially how to make our communities more our democracy more accessible. And so we work on those types of policies as well. And I mean, as a think tank, it differs from a nonprofit where with nonprofits they have like a bigger advocacy apparatus, right? So
Hmm.
they focus on citizen lobbying,
Hmm.
not professional lobbying but citizen lobbying. They focus on educating members of the community on charitable pursuits, things like that. Whereas a think tank, our power comes from our research and our insight into how our state could be better. So yeah.
Awesome. And now I want to take, I like to do things a little differently here. I want to take a
Shoot.
step back now. I kind of want to start with your background in the political world and fighting for tenants' rights, affordable housing, and
Mhm.
workers' rights, among many other different issues. What was some of the things you did early on after graduation and after getting your Master of Arts degree? What was some of the stuff you were doing on the ground?
Well, actually, it even starts before that. In fact, I can tell you exactly when I first got involved as a youngster. I was
Yes.
13 years old, and the Iraq War happened. And my friend came to me one day, and we were in high school. I think I want to say a freshman, yeah, but um, freshman or just become it's like an early sophomore. But anyway, I digress. So he came to me and said, "Hey, Cliff, so there is a protest downtown," and I got into the newspaper because of attending this protest. And I remember immediately, for some reason, I just excitedly shook him and said, "Dude, I'm against this war. I hate Bush. Like, why didn't you let me know? Like, we could do this." Because for me, in my family, I grew up learning about the civil rights movement,
Mm.
learning about how people organize, and even in my family, my grandmother helped organize her labor union. And she was very big into really into advocacy,
Mm.
particularly when it came to desegregating public schools and things like that. So I came from a household where that was really valued. And after attending that first protest, I never really looked back because I saw an opportunity where we could remake the world again in a better way, and in a way that was better for people, and particularly based on my lived experiences, a way in which it just respects our dignity as human beings. So from there, as after I left grad school, I worked as a union salt for a time with the United Food and Commercial Workers, so kind of like an undercover organizer. I won't say, well, I mean, I could say I worked at Price Right, undercover, trying to push
Oh,
folks to unionize.
yeah,
So yeah.
there was that famous woman that did that one story years and years and years and years
Mhm.
ago. I remember learning about that. Wow, that must have been an incredible job. I'll have to talk to you about that at a different time, but
Oh yeah, yeah. It was a trip, and you know what? I always credit. So going from grad school and working there, I always credit that job because as really giving me the footing I needed in order to be able to really appreciate working class movement, as well as appreciate the importance of the kind of political work that we do, because I was horrible at it out of grad school, but I was horrible at it in a way where I started to become much more grounded, and I started to adapt essentially a framework of praxis, or a blending of theory and
Mhm.
practice, and deriving a theoretical perspective based on practice instead of the other way around, right? And that was just my personal development. So, going from throughout my resume, I've always been committed to fighting for working people and fighting for marginalized people, and standing in solidarity with them. And now this particular job, I feel like, takes it up a notch, because when it comes to the housing crisis, that at the core of it, there's a scarcity and an affordability problem, that we don't have places where people live, and that drives up housing prices and housing costs. But also, for the places that are there and for the stock that does exist, it is becoming increasingly expensive in our major cities, and in even in our mid-sized cities like Buffalo, my hometown,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or even in East Hampton, where you're starting to see either massive developments, or single family homes becoming increasingly unaffordable, and you don't see many apartments, townhomes, duplexes, condos, nothing in between to fill in that missing middle, as we call it, right, or infill housing.
Yeah.
So yeah, like
Yeah.
that is, I would say that the housing question is one of the defining human rights questions of our time.
Yeah, which really, I joke with people out here. I'm the only person my age that knows anything about housing out where I live. Most people come to this greater realization, usually in college, that
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to find a place to live here unless you make it big or your parents give you
Right,
their home. And
right,
obviously, the Hamptons very different than Seattle, Portland, and that area. Um,
right.
but there are similarities, and housing needs to be built everywhere. And how I originally got to brought to your attention was the Yimby Town conference,
Hmm.
and there's Yimbys and NIMBYs everywhere. Yimbys being yes in my backyard, NIMBYs being no in my backyard. I'd like to go into a little bit about the Yimby Town conference that the Sightline
Hmm.
Institute has each year. You had it this past year in
Hmm.
2022 for the first time since 2020. And these are just
Hmm.
a few of the things that has changed since. I got this right off your website. Portland legalized six plexes without parking
Hmm.
citywide.
Yep.
California eliminated the statewide mandate for single detached housing.
Hmm.
A new federal administration, Biden, is proposing initiatives to encourage cities to eliminate apartment bans, which is obviously I support,
Right.
everyone should support. And then the focus was climate change and community stabilization. Um, I personally find, and before we go into that, I personally find Yimmy and NIMBY to be absolutely fascinating.
Hmm.
I think the psychology of it is fascinating. We kind of talked about it when we chatted for a little bit. So I really let me. My first question is let me know a little bit about what the goal of Yimby Town is of the conference, and then second, I would like your personal opinion on really the psychology of how someone could be liberal, but the second housing is in
Mm.
their area, they're going to the town and they're fighting it. Really, the psychology behind YIMBY and NIMBY and what it's like in the Pacific Northwest instead of where I live.
Right. So I'll say two things. One, we don't have, I mean, we've written about NIMBYism, left NIMBYism on the right. But I would say that when it comes to thinking about NIMBYism versus YIMBYism, it's not necessarily on the same spectrum as like liberal and Democrat, because as you indicated, that or sorry, liberal and conservative,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of binary we have in American politics. Because as you indicated, that you would have some people that are, one would consider, liberal, NPR, listening, donating, environmentalists. They
Mm-hmm.
love Trader Joe's and they'll always vote,
Mm-hmm.
blue no matter who, whatever. Yet when it comes to building an apartment in their, neighborhood, that they will shudder at that. They'll be the first one to go to city council and say block it,
Yep.
like
Yeah, it's true.
downzone my neighborhood, right? um that being said, although you do have people that are genuinely concerned about gentrification, right? And so I'll just to go off script for a second, that you also have individuals that are commonly being known as FIMBYs, or public housing in my backyard, which I think is a more defensible, far more defensible position than the NIMBY position, obviously. And for myself personally, I'm interested in like squaring the in finding a bridge, more of a bridge between the YIMBY and the FIMBY perspectives. But from the perspective of the organization, the result is the same, right? Like if we
Hmm.
treat these things as zero sum, no housing is built. Like that,
Yeah.
that's just the bottom line.
Yep.
So, when for example, we are advocating for policies to reform zoning laws in Washington State, because when you look at housing markets, that you cannot, especially in America in the 21st century, just look at it on a local level. But the issue is that cities are absolutely invested in the idea of local control, that
Hmm.
they and many state legislators believe wholeheartedly that the best place to make zoning decisions is on local level. And while
Hmm.
local governments have a role to play in the process, that often those same local governments are unfortunately susceptible to NIMBYs. They're susceptible to people who will frequently vote in off-year elections. I just know
Hmm.
personally, I ran for Kent City Council in the suburban, it's a city that's a suburb of Seattle, just south of Seattle. By the way, shout out to my friends and family back in Buffalo who supported from there. Even though I'm a Washingtonian, according to my wife now, I'll always, in my heart of hearts, be a New Yorker.
Go
Um,
Bills. Go Bills.
I know, right? Well, I'm more like go Bills pizza, but I will, or better yet, go Leonardi's. But anyway, I could wax philosophical about Buffalo pizza all day. But anyway, long story short, when it comes to that local decision making, that you get bogged down in this in a process that is un is not suitable for the scope of the crisis, because we're facing a national housing crisis. And when you look at housing markets, that you have to look at them on a statewide and even regional level, right?
Yeah.
Because people are moving throughout regions, throughout states, and we increasingly see a suburbanization of poverty, of especially with now what we're doing, like telecommuting due to a pandemic. You don't have many people going to the offices, or even living in or rather, you have more growth in the suburbs these
Yeah.
days. So I mean, there are a number of different factors I could, go into, but long story short, that the kind of very hyper local, small town mentality, when it comes to even mid-sized cities like Buffalo, or even bigger cities like Seattle, that just have a very strong sense of local identity, that
Hmm.
that can often be a hindrance for progress, where in many cases we need to upzone and incentivize more housing. And also, I should add, for what was it? For other states as well, particularly New York State, that
Hmm.
there are many parts of even downstate New York and New York City are still underzoned,
Yep.
that only allow single family housing, so no single family neighborhoods. And this is where the FIMBY and the NIMBY perspective unfortunately come very close. You have many working class people who are genuinely just essentially have no other options. If they what they see, at least on the surface, is that they see, even though data wise there's not a lot of data to prove that new market rate housing is necessarily going to drive up prices so radically, at least immediately, to kick people out of their homes. and I'm not saying gentrification isn't real, because it is very much real, but it's a more complex and long-term process. However, in these single family neighborhoods, and particularly in middle income and high income areas, that you'll have people who that are concerned about potentially rising property taxes. And in a state like Washington, where we don't have a state income tax, and thus we finance many services based on property taxes at local and state level, that, albeit, is a sympathetic concern, but it's not, how should I put this, but it's not a surefire thing, right?
Yeah.
That necessarily, building an apartment building means that you're going to be run out of your home. The second thing is, there unfortunately is a competition for funds. That in
Yep.
Washington State we have a housing trust
Yep.
fund, and in New York, from what I remember, that there's a similar fund set up to build
Yep.
affordable housing. And for many affordable housing advocates that are advocating for affordable rental housing, that they often have to fight back against not just outright NIMBYs that don't want working class and poor people to live in their communities, but they also have to fight back against a number of industry interests that ironically would benefit from building more housing.
Yep.
And there's that friction. On the other hand, that you have many YIMBYs that support the building of just more
Hmm.
apartment buildings in general, and particularly sympathetic to affordable units. However, that you also have those that want to see home ownership options and affordable home ownership options, but the money isn't going there. So that
Yep.
creates tension as well. And I should add, those, for me at least, I see it as part of a spectrum, right? It's more of a yes and rather than an no, or either or rather an or, right? Yeah,
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. I think it needs to be a mix of everything.
exactly.
My boss, for example, I'm not going to name him. Everybody knows who my boss is if you're watching this. But
Oh, he's watching,
he
or
was the
she, or
last
they.
he was the last person or the last group of people in the '80s to have a home ownership program via the town, and where he could have home ownership after so many decades, but they haven't done it since. So
Yeah,
when you talk about whether it be apartment buildings or singles or condos or houses, I think it needs to be a little bit of everything, like you said.
absolutely.
It's and that's where you're seeing across the country where I often find the one thing that the MBs need to work on is constructively recognizing what they're going for instead of one thing. It needs to be more centralized into what do we want as a whole, not just one little
Right.
thing here, one little thing there. If you don't mind, if you could just tell me a little bit about that Yimby Town conference that the Sightline
Oh,
Institute
absolutely.
hosts.
Oh, so it was fantastic. So, I only, we'll say, I only witnessed a few of the conference panels and whatnot, but we had a lot of great speakers, including, one of our legislative champions, Representative Jessica Bateman. We had
Oh,
speaker and maybe future governor of Oregon, Tina Kotek, come out, as well as Jerusalem Demsus, who is a writer, reporter at the Atlantic, and
oh,
also
wow.
she's written for Vox, and
Yeah.
she just writes amazing work on housing. And at that conference, we also had a number of different groups contribute to various sessions. So an unconference, where
Mm.
essentially is an open source p- uh, portion of the conference where participants could basically do their own sessions. And one of the sessions that I found particularly interesting, that was facilitated by Erica Dorn and Ken Kinoshita, was about the suburbs. And in fact, when it comes to, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but when it comes to suburban growth, that um, essentially there are there's a legacy of redlining and a legacy
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
segregation, particularly like anti-black segregation, to prevent the people of color from living in the suburbs and working people from living in the suburbs, that has resulted in bad planning in the suburbs, a small town mentality, despite suburban cities actually like the one I live in, Kent, from actually growing in an equitable and in a sustainable way. In fact, when it comes to the future of American cities, that right now the suburbs are growing faster than
Yep.
the city centers.
Mm-hmm.
And how should I put this? And we're looking at more metropolitan areas becoming the norm and having this kind of how should I put this suburban urban kind of polity forming, rather than just having the segregated suburbs, or the segregated suburbs where middle class folks stereotypically live, and the city where so-called inner city folk live, which we all know is euphemism for working class Black and brown folks. And unfortunately, that is a legacy, and both in terms of planning and policy, that we have to deal with.
No, you're definitely right. I mean, I in a previous episodes I talked to a guest of mine about just how Long Island was built and how it was totally in a racist manner and it was promoting segregation and that's why we have the issues today where Nassau and Suffolk County are the highest single family zoning
Hmm.
counties in the entire country. Um,
Exactly.
unless those numbers change within the last 5 months. But we are running out of time here, so I wanted to thank you for coming on. Maybe down the line we could talk about more what you guys are
Absolutely.
doing. I do want to give the viewers, if you want to learn more about the Sightline Institute, you can go to sightline.org. Clifford is on there. Cliff, sorry. And then
That's right.
if you want to learn about the Yimby Town Conference, you go to yimby.town. I believe they're planning a new one for 2023.
Yes, we are.
Um, Cliff, if
Annual
unless
conference. Oh, I was gonna say annual conference. We hosted at different places in the Pacific Northwest, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one.
for Cliff at the Sightline Institute and Yimby Town, I'm Matt Lownes at LTV. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
You too. Have a good day, folks.